Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are taking on a really unique mission. We aren't looking at a historical event or a technology that's been around for years. We are plunging headfirst into a philosophical framework, one that was developed and released only at the very end of last year, Martino Kim's Terra Nova Flow, or TNF. So, our mission today is to really internalize the radical shift that TNF proposes. It suggests that when we hit any kind of friction in our work, in complex systems, even in our relationships, we have to stop. We have to stop seeing the problem as a personal failure or some kind of shortcoming. We have to relabel it completely. Problems are fundamentally broken flows. We're looking at a new manual for navigating what Kim calls the new Earth, and that means redesigning how we even see obstacles.
And setting the stage for Martino Kim
Mm.
it's essential here. He's not some tenured academic philosopher working purely in the abstract. He's an engineer. He has over 4 decades of experience in, the toughest arena of problem solving,
Mm-hmm.
root cause analysis, RCA. RCA is so rigorous. It looks at machinery processes and it asks what exactly broke and why.
Mm-hmm.
Kim took that incredible rigor and synthesized it with systems thinking and deep philosophy to build TNF. It's really a practical framework disguised as philosophy.
Okay, so let's unpack that core idea then. When you apply RCA to a machine, you stop asking who was careless with this equipment.
Hmm.
You start asking what structural part failed to connect or move like it was supposed to. TNF just applies that same forensic rigor to, well, everything else. You stop asking who is at fault, and the question immediately becomes,
Where did the flow break?
yes, that shift in the lens from individual blame to systemic blockage, that's the entire foundation, isn't it?
It is the foundation, and it's because TNF prioritizes perception before you even start thinking, and flow before you even look for a solution. I mean, if you perceive the world as just a series of isolated failures, your solutions are going to be, punitive or dislocalized. But if you see the world as this interconnected web of flows where disruptions are just signals, then your solutions automatically become systemic. They become restorative.
Oh, I was so fascinated when I read that. TNF calls a problem a signal, not a failure. That really stuck with me. If my team misses a deadline, my default frame is failure. It just is. But if I adopt TNF, that missed deadline is just a visible trace, like a footprint in the mud. It's just an indicator that something essential has, stopped moving.
That's exactly right, and this is so vital for actually applying it. Think about it. A conflict in a relationship, a software bug, organizational chaos. Martino Kim argues these things rarely, if ever, start because of pure malicious intent or, stupidity. They are the observable results of a failure of structure and connection. The human system is designed to flow, but the structure we put on it or the connection we ignored, that's what failed. So it forces us to look past the individual and ask, where is the connection missing, instead of asking, why is this person so flawed?
And that structural view leads right into Principle 5, which fundamentally redefines our identity inside this system. It says we're not just passive consumers of flow, we consume power, data, money. Instead, TNF says we are inherently its architects.
It's a powerful claim. It's a radical claim. If you see yourself as a consumer, you're just reacting to the flows that already exist. You complain about traffic, you navigate bureaucracy, you just survive the week. But as an architect, you recognize your own capacity to reconfigure those connections. You can actively redesign the paths of communication or resources or even thought rather than just enduring them. You become the active designer.
That shift from victim to designer is just incredibly empowering. Okay, let's dive into the core engine of this. The 7 principles of flow restoration. We have to start with principle 0, and this is where Kim, the engineer, really throws us a curveball. The foundational principle is heart, but it's not sentimental at all.
No, it's defined very precisely in the source material. It says, love is not a sentiment, it is positive flow energy. You have to think of it kinetically. It's like pure momentum or maybe the engine oil of the system. In engineering, you need a driving force to get over inertia. In TNF, love provides that initial positive thrust. It is the intent that restores the connection.
Oh, wait, but if we bring this back to, say, the workplace, how does an engineer define love as a practical component? Does this mean every project needs some kind of emotional hug before it kicks off?
Not at all. It means the intention has to be restorative, has to be aligned toward connection rather than being, say, competitive or self-serving. If a team's driving force is just about maximizing personal gain, the flow of information will be guarded. It'll stagnate. But if the driving force, the heart, is that positive flow energy aimed at mutual creation, well, the system gets energized. Fragmentation goes down, value circulates. It just sets the energetic direction for everything that comes after.
Fascinating. So if that positive energy sets the direction, let's move to the structural principles. Principle 2, the structure of the world, says separation is basically an illusion.
Isolation is the fatal framing error. That's what he says. We're all taught to manage silos, right? The marketing department, the IT department, my personal life, my professional life, all these separate things. TNF forces you to realize that while they're distinct, they are fundamentally interconnected. They operate as one single large network. So when one flow breaks, let's say an IT glitch, it immediately impacts the marketing flow and maybe the flow of the CEO's stress. Viewing them separately just guarantees you'll only find partial solutions.
And if everything is interconnected, that radically changes how we think about control, about movement. Which brings us right to principle 3, the operation of power.
Right. Power in this framework is only meaningful when it flows. The sources are really clear on this. Stagnant power doesn't just stop being useful, it actively turns into pressure or even violence. When a leader hoards information or hoards authority, that stagnation creates toxicity. It creates organizational stress. It's only when power, so resources, information, influence is circulating that it generates value and trust and life across the whole network.
But that raises a big question, and it's one that always comes up when we talk about systems. If we want power to flow, how does TNF stop powerful flows from just overwhelming the weaker ones? Where's the check and balance?
That's a critical point. The answer is in the definition of flow itself. A true restorative flow, one that's driven by principle zero, by heart, is reciprocal. It's value generating for the whole system. When power just overwhelms something, that's not flow, that's force. It's pressure. A healthy flow needs connection and feedback loops. If the structure allows power to be purely extractive, purely one way, the system will eventually exhaust the weaker parts and then collapse. It violates principle 4, the need for sustainable resolution. The check really is the system's eventual exhaustion.
Perfect segue. So principle 4, the law of resolution. It states that true sustainable solutions are always acts of flow restoration. I need a clear distinction here. In practical terms, what's the difference between, say, optimizing something and restoring its flow?
Okay, let's use a common system example. A congested highway. Optimization would be adding another lane or maybe adjusting the traffic light timers. It's a temporary partial fix. It makes the existing flow faster. Restoration, on the other hand, asks, why is everyone even on the highway in the first place? So restoration might involve redesigning the city grid or improving public transit or decentralizing workplaces. It doesn't just speed up the current flow, it redesigns the channels so the system can sustain itself without needing constant temporary fixes. You're restoring the natural movement, not just patching up the symptom.
That makes it very clear. Okay, so moving past restoration, we get to how we evaluate things. Principle 6, the criterion of direction. Direction is seen as more important than speed.
Much more important. If you are accelerating incredibly fast, but you're going in the wrong direction, you're just getting to collapse quicker. The flow has to be aligned toward harmony. Kim uses the example of a rapidly growing startup. The speed, the acceleration, it's all high. But if that growth isn't aligned with internal harmony, if teams are burning out, if resources are stretched thin, that velocity just leads to systemic exhaustion, inevitable collapse. Direction provides the meaning and the stability you need to be sustainable.
And finally, the ultimate operational tool they introduce is Principle 7, the structure of perception, or the frame matrix, this idea that reality isn't just observed, it's actively framed by us.
It's the lens we use to interpret everything.
Mhm.
And the bold idea is that if you change the frame, the world, the network, the relationships, it literally reorganizes itself around that new frame. This is crucial for anyone trying to be an architect of flow.
Can we get a quick, concrete workplace example? Because this one sounds, deeply theoretical.
Absolutely. So imagine you're dealing with a colleague who is constantly challenging your ideas. Frame A. You see that colleague as an obstacle, an antagonist trying to undermine you. What's the result? Your relational flow becomes defensive, it becomes closed and slow. You guard information. Now frame B, you shift the frame matrix. You now see that colleague as a necessary stress test mechanism, someone who forces rigor into your ideas. The flow immediately reorganizes itself. You start proactively seeking their feedback. You share details earlier. You use their resistance to make your work stronger. The person didn't change, but the entire dynamic of the flow did. That's the power of the frame matrix. Now, if we take these principles and kind of zoom out, What's really impressive is how Martino Kim extended this traditional RCA. He took it and turned it into what he calls the language of life, applying the exact same analysis across technology, policy, and our personal lives.
Let's do a deep dive on that application for relationships, because that feels like the most sensitive domain. When conflict hits, TNF insists these are primarily flow problems, not just emotional ones.
That's the RCA of relationships right there. It immediately stops the unproductive question. Who is right? Who needs to apologize? And it demands a structural analysis instead. It asks, where did emotion stop moving? Was expression blocked? And did that lead to stagnation? Why does this reaction loop, this painful cycle of the same argument, keep happening?
And healing is redefined, which is huge. Healing is reconfiguration, not persuasion.
Exactly. You're not trying to convince the other person they're wrong. You're recognizing the existing communication structure itself is flawed.
Yeah.
So healing becomes the process of redesigning that connection, maybe by setting up new agreed-upon channels for crucial info or scheduling moments for positive feedback. You're preventing the system from getting overloaded with negative pressure. You're literally rebuilding the flow channels.
And we see a similar critical shift when TNF is applied to big social and political issues. The framework just fundamentally avoids classifying these complex problems as moral battles. This clash between good and evil that leads to so much gridlock.
Correct. Policy failure, for example, is rarely seen as a failure of good intentions. It's analyzed as a failure of flow design. If a policy creates bottlenecks, or restricts the circulation of resources, or encourages hoarding stagnant power, it's a design flaw. It needs an engineering review, not a moral crusade that ends in public shaming.
And this reframing has massive implications for how we look at systemic problems like structural inequality.
Absolutely. TNF reframes structural inequality not as a difference in personal merit, but as a difference in access to circulation, access to healthy flow channels. The problem isn't that certain people lack ability. The problem is that the flows of capital and opportunity and information are blocked, or they're intentionally restricted for certain groups. So the solution is to increase the accuracy of our perception by finding those blocked channels, not to just, reduce anger or push a specific ideology.
Finally, we have to talk about the really unique inclusion of music in the framework. It's presented as a result, the residue of flow. This seems almost mystical for a philosophy that's rooted in RCA.
It connects all these highly technical structures back to the kinetic reality of movement. Kim's work suggests that some flows, especially those involving deep connection and principle zero, heart, they just can't be perfectly transmitted through logical words or org charts. When the RCA and the philosophical inquiry have done their work, the logical discussion is over. But the flow has to keep going.
And that's where music comes in.
Yes. The sound, the rhythm, the vibrational energy, it bypasses the logical mind and makes sure the flow continues moving. Music is a residual wave that maintains connection after the words have failed. It keeps the system kinetic. It prevents new stagnation from taking root right after you've done a reconfiguration.
This has been a really comprehensive deep dive into Martino Kim's Terra Nova Flow. When you synthesize all 7 principles and all the applications, the entire framework just converges back on that one single foundational question.
Where was the flow broken and how can it be restored?
Mm.
That is the core directive. It's a philosophy that isn't seeking to eliminate problems, because problems are signals. They're essential feedback. It just seeks to restore perpetual movement and flow across all domains of our experience.
And to leave you with a final thought, tying this all back to the power of that frame matrix, if reality is framed and not merely observed, what connections in your life, in your work, your relationships, or your view of how power operates are you currently misinterpreting as separation? What are you seeing as a wall when it's actually a locked door? And what if you're holding the key and that key is simply finding the correct frame?